Как опыт Нью-Йорка можно использовать в развитии Москвы?
Okay, so I will admit that I'm not familiar with much of the processes in Moscow, but what we see in large cities in the U.S. is that the technology infrastructure and the processes have been implemented at the department level, in many cases at the department level. So within specific departments in transportation, in public safety, healthcare, education, each independent department has deployed technology and processes in order to make their systems work. Now what we're finding is there's a proliferation of technology and processes to the point where it's very difficult for citizens to know where they can get the specific services. It's also very difficult for the government, the administration, to manage across all of those different services and have a holistic vision of the performance of the city. So what we're finding is that, so the way it could be applied in the case of Moscow is to understand where those technology implementations exist across different city systems and create a structure that can aggregate some of the information collected out of those systems and be able to provide, for example, like in the case of New York, a single point of access for the citizens, but also provide an infrastructure that allows the city leadership to see holistically the performance of the city. So in terms of which processes should be addressed first, what we're finding across cities, across the globe, is that cities often address their most critical pain points. So in some cities, it's a question of transportation. They have major issues with traffic jams and commuting that takes several hours to get from home to work. And so one of the initial things that they try to address are those transportation issues. Now they do that through both policies and processes, things like congestion-based pricing, peak pricing on tolls, on roads, on bridges, in order to change the behaviors of people, but they're also using technologies in order to implement that. So lane changes, improving public transportation, improving the ability of citizens to know when the next train is coming. So Singapore, for example, has a system in which the transport authority predicts the arrival of trains and can or trains or buses can very accurately predict that, provide an SMS message to someone whose has a subscription to a specific type of service, and therefore you can facilitate or increase the ease of use of public transportation. In other cases, in the city of New York, for example, crime was one of their first priorities. New York was known as a city that had very high crime. And so they implemented a strategy of creating an integrated response, emergency response system across the different agencies, public safety agencies. So being able to do that allowed them to respond more quickly to emergency calls and improve the services that were delivered to the citizens with respect to preventing crime and responding to crime. So we're seeing cities implement specific initiatives based on their most critical pain points. Now, one of the recommendations that we have is to not just work from a siloed system perspective, but to do that with a broad vision of the performance of the city as a whole, so that a technology that's implemented within public safety could then perhaps be leveraged in another system like transportation. And that information and then again implemented in yet another system, so that the infrastructure services can be leveraged across different systems rather than creating multiple silos of technology that are independent from each other. So being able to create that holistic vision allows the city leaders to be able to better monitor the performance of those services, that service delivery, and then be able to react and make policy changes based on their performance as a city administration.
Как развитие социальных сетей и блогов влияет на развитие этих вот общественных движений, становления гражданского общества?
So we're seeing both in the business world as well as in the government world the use of these social platforms as a way of listening to their audiences. Whether it's from a marketing perspective, enterprises are listening to what's happening on Twitter and to the dialogues that are taking place on social networks in order to understand and get feedback from their potential customers. Similarly, the government is doing the same thing. So they're listening to conversations about things that are happening in their cities in order to better understand how they can serve their citizens. Now, the city of San Francisco has been following a hashtag, so on Twitter, the hash SF311, for years now to understand where there are specific incidents, and they're using that to encourage citizens to report street lights that are burned out, or potholes in the road, or criminal activities, or any other observations. And that specific information is being fed into the city's databases so that they can capture that dialogue that's happening within the social network. So they're using those social networks, whether it's Twitter or others, as a channel into the government and as a channel from the government. So it's not they're leveraging where those citizens are actually, where they are today, and where they're conducting a dialogue about the city. So it's similar to, you think about the main square in an old-fashioned village, and where the dialogue, or a cafe where people were talking about the city. Now that's happening online. It's happening in some of the social networks. So the cities are now starting to leverage that channel to their citizens.
Спасибо.